Hi, this is Sally and thank you for joining me today. I was called by a gentleman that I used to work for a while ago who said that he had a motorbike seat and could I do something about it. Then his client phoned and I went and picked it up. I don't believe it's a motorbike seat exactly. I think from talking to the gentleman it's actually a bar stool. The problem, he was finding that the foam that was in here wasn't thick enough, so he and his wife decided to attach this to it, which is not going to work. And I absolutely get why they did it. This isn't the first time people have added things to and not realised that's not really the way we go about it. They also provided fabric to do it. But I'm thinking that if I clean all of this goop off, I might be able to save the cover and just replace the foam underneath. So that is what I'm looking at first. So it seems pointless to me replacing something that doesn't need replacing. So let's get on with it. Like with any other project, I need to remove the staples and then take the cover off. By pulling these out all the way round, they're coming out quite evenly, so far that is. Now the gentleman said that if I couldn't get them out straight then not to worry about putting them back in, but I do try to return things as and when possible. Now to remove the rest of the cover. Should, I think, come off the back first. It's going to be awkward getting it back on. There we go. So this goes down here and is held in place here, so I've got to take those off too. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is to undo the cover. I'm going to tease some of these stitches out first with my needle. It's going to be slow progress because everything is double stitched. The new fabric is a lot firmer than this, so I might need to keep the underside just so I can pull it over the new foam. Then I'll have the pattern pieces for the new cover. When you're cutting these things, always cut towards the piece you're taking out, and that should help not cut into things. This part is worn here and along here, so this needs to be replaced, the seat needs to be replaced, and obviously this side does as well. So I'll take this section out. Some projects like this, you don't always have to replace everything, you just replace what you need to. Because these shapes don't really make much sense unless they're sewn in together, I have attached them to the front portion in the way that they came out, and I know that because there's paint there and there's some paint on the front there, so those match. Should be identical both sides, so if I do that they should match, and they do. Now something that is awkward is this is very slippery on here, so I'm going to cut it from here. It just means that this stays a little bit firmer. It could do that way, that's not too bad either, but that really holds it than if it was on the other side. Now usually this is the warp and weft, but it's really difficult to see because this is such a stretchy fabric, so I'm going to have to guess. I hate guessing. Looking on the back, I can see that there's lines going across this way, which probably means that is the weft thread and that's the warp thread. It's awkward to tell because what they do is they have a fabric and then they compress this top faux leather onto it. They can be woven or they can be knitted. I'm going to just cut round like this. Now here there is a halfway mark, so I'm going to pop that in. There's a halfway mark on here, so I'm going to pop that in. Push the seam out so it's nice and flat, and then just cut round. When I look along the top, there's a mark here, a mark here, and a mark here. You could pin the fabric on, just make sure that if you do use pins that they're in where the seam is so that you don't mark the fabric on the front. Now this piece I did end up pinning so that I could cut it out, only because the area that had been top stitched down didn't want to lay flat. So in order to make it lay flat, that's what I had to do. I've remembered to put the marks on either side, so that should line up with this one here, so I can't lose it. Let's just put a pin right where that seam is, like that, and I'll cut the other one out. I'm going to pop this raw edge on the center where my needle comes down and just measure out to where the end of the seam is, so where the stitch line is. It might vary on different things, so just be aware of that if you're doing something like this that's fitted. Lots of things you can get away with, but other things you can't. remove that because this is arced, and pop that down here at the front. Pop that under to where the seam allowance is. I'm just going to go a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back. That's just so that it won't move, and I'm hoping I don't have to worry too much. I hope this goes along as it should. So the bottom piece of fabric, I'm following along that line, and the top piece of fabric I'm bringing into line. So every couple of stitches I'll bring it round like this. Otherwise it might not want to go in properly. And it looks like those marks are going to more or less line up. That's good. And then I've got to just pull it in so it straightens out as I get close to the back here. And those two ends meet there. Seam goes down, so I'm going to top stitch that. I'm literally going to run the fold of this along the side of here so that it goes into place, and again it's on the longest stitch. Because it's shaped, I'm going to have to maneuver it like this and keep it as even as you can, and it lines up nicely here. You can see it's gone in quite smoothly, and then the top stitching just holds it. Now for the other side, do it from the top down like I did on the way up. I'm going to line that up so it just crosses at the top like that. It can't cross too much, just the width of the seam. And again, I'm going to keep the bottom fabric straight on there, and the top will be the one that I maneuver. Do it slowly, don't just hoof it across, otherwise it won't go in nicely at all. And again, it looks like that mark is going to meet up. There we go. It's nicely in, and then into the curve. And the curve just comes round. Even if you can only do it one stitch at a time, when you bring the top side into place, then do it, because you want it as even as and smoothly as possible. I'm going to top stitch that down too. These are the two pieces that I'm putting in. They're both arched the same way. The trouble is, when you sew them in together, the arcs go in the opposite directions. I'm going to pop this here so it's level there. Because this is the inside, I'm going to keep that on top, and I'm going to treat this as a border, so that one has to stay straight. I'm just going to sew a few stitches at a time so that I can pull these into place. The bottom one has to be as straight as possible going through, and the top one has to be brought into it like this. It's a little bit awkward. I also have two tabs that have to be brought in together. The top one needs to be pulled slightly, I think, to meet with that, but not pulled in too much, just eased in, especially the first one, because if the first one is out, the other subsequent ones will be out too. They're more or less in line. They should work. And I'll just keep it slightly taut as I go on round to the center. As I come into the other side, I'm still going to keep it taut to make sure that that and that line up at the bottom there. Now I'm going to top stitch that into position. I think I'll do it from this side, because then I can use this fold here along the inside there. Now again, here's the seat and here's the back. So both curves go the same way until you start sewing them. Here's the circle, so that goes on the top. Use it in and it crosses over like that. So that's where I'm going to start here. The more fabric on there becomes a little bit more awkward to control. The bottom I'm going to treat as the border, so that has to be as straight as possible, and the top is the bit that is worked in. There's a little discrepancy here, so I'm going to try to even that out as I get closer. And I'll pull that round and into place. Now it doesn't look like I've got to pull the top one into position. It looks like it's just going to sew where it needs to be sewn into. Those are the two marks. Line them up as best I can, and then pull into the second one, which is there. It feels like the bottom one needs to be pulled. So the bottom's being pulled in this case to get it to go in, not by very much, just a little bit, so it would even out. And again for that one, and then I'll just let that come into position for the other end. There we go. See if I can even that out and pull it into place. Now I know it was a little bit over, so that should be fine. When I look at the seams, how the seams line up on both sides, they're about the same, so I'm not going to worry about that. That's fine. I'm going to sew this on the back. I didn't want to overcomplicate sewing all of this in at the beginning because I just wanted to make sure the two pieces I put together fitted nicely. Now this I'm going to just pop under here, lift the foot up, and I am going to sew just on this side of this black line here. I don't want to have the two sets of stitching together because I don't want to pull this in and stress the outside stitching. It's about a foot width in from the outside edge. Make sure all the raw edges run together. And cut some of this off, don't need all of that on there. And then reverse. Having sewn that in just a little bit inside from the original stitching that I put in, and I'm going to top stitch all the way along here, just as I have on the other pieces. I've top stitched this down, but I haven't top stitched that into place. That has to be separate as that's pulling down, and if this tears, it shouldn't tear in here, so that's why that's done like that. Because I've got these in and I won't be able to guarantee that everything will go into place, I'm going to cut these two sections out. I've joined the centre back for the outside, opened that seam up, and I had taken the tape from the original. I'm going to just sew that into place here. Roll that up, slide it into place, and I'm going to follow the seam up the side of here. That should be fine. Make sure that that goes all the way to the end like that, and sew evenly. When I get to the end, flip it and go down the other side. Make sure it does cover both sides of the seam. That's just to hold everything in place so the seam doesn't pull apart. I'm going to sew the original on. As I go, I'll pull out all these threads. I'm going to sew it so I can see where the original seam was. I want to just keep it as even as I possibly can. Let's get that into place. I need to make sure that that all comes in together as closely as possible. And then again, top stitch down. I'm not going to worry too much about lining up here because it's going to do its own thing, and it is mostly underneath the chair. My reticence about using this is because there is some damage there, but as I say, the fact that this stretches way more than this is the reason I'm using it. Because usually I replace everything. The centres line up nicely. I have to put these in, and I'm thinking I'm going to put the back border and underneath the seat in. I'm going to start with joining this with that mark there, because the round side needs to be up like that. Then I'm going to try to bring this in to be straight and that to go on top of it, just like I have in other areas where it's shaped like this. Sometimes you have to tackle things from either side, and that's what I'm going to have to do with this. I think that's going to pull in if I pull it down, and that pulls into here. And then I'm going to flip it like this so I can go from that point where I started to the other end, because this on the top is the rounded side, and although this is rounded and it's going the same direction, this is basically the border, so I want to keep that all straight. And bring it in. Hopefully the center will reach the center, because there's my center for here. This one here is the center that I want it to match to. I think the bottom needs to be pulled slightly and the top pushed slightly, so it all comes into place. Just a little bit of tautness to bring it in line. There we go. And the same down the other end. So long as this and this mark here line up, that's all that really matters. So you can see I need to pull this in just a little bit to match the bottom. I'm going to start at this end and work towards here. There's a little bit of a gap, so I'll put a little bit of a gap at the bottom like that and bring it in. Okay, so I started on the other side, but when I got to the mark, I realised that the underside of here, which is meant to be on the top, is quite a bit smaller than the outside. So I am unpicking my stitches very carefully, and I don't want to be ripping the stitches because I don't want to risk ruining the fabric any more than I already have. If I take it back here and just pull it in, that should all fit in. My line is a little bit wobbly here and I don't like that. Never mind, start again. Not the first time. Certainly won't be the last time. Now I've undone all of this, I've realised the foam actually is quite good. His main problem is that the foam on the corners here, which go round a metal bar, are not soft enough. So I'm going to get another layer of foam to go over the seat part and build it up just slightly here, but I can't build it up too much because if I do that, then the new cover isn't going to fit very well. I don't really want to take it up at the back. That's not really his problem, I don't think. He said that his legs go numb when he's sitting here, which means it's cutting off some of the blood flow. And I believe he sits on it quite a bit of time because it's in his hobby room. I'm not going to take anything lower off. I don't think that needs to happen. So if I take this off like this, see it's got a foam cover over it. I don't want to ruin the integrity, that's the thing. Leave that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And then recut the piece to go on top. And I think if I do that in medium density, it will work. It's 3/4 of an inch deep. I've got this foam which is an inch deep. I'm hoping that it's not going to be too much, and I'm going to allow a little bit more width on here. This poor pen doesn't work. Okay, if I scrape in the shape I want, that works as well, like that, and around the top and across, and the same on the other side. There we go. Then all I've got to do is use a pair of scissors and cut around the shape that I have drawn. I'm going to push this in as far as I can back, like that, because I don't want that coming forward. That comes around there, and that comes around there. I'm going to glue along this edge so that it can be brought into here. There wasn't any sign of being glued here, so I'm not going to do that. So hopefully the tightness of the cover and that little bit of glue will hold everything in place. I'll do it in sections, I'm not doing it all in one go. I'm just going to roll that on top of the existing foam here. You have to hold it and try not to get stuck to it. It's really awkward doing it like this. And it might not hold very well, which is also annoying, but if I can just start it, I'll be happy. Okay, so that might help hold it in place on that side, and I'll do the same on this side. And you can see there was a spot of glue here, so I'm going to do that too, just like that, and put that on there like that. I'm hoping this works. I'm so nervous about getting all of this back together because it was so difficult to take off. I did sew all of this in and then top stitched here, and also along the back here. It's a little bit wrinkly because one had to be pulled against the other. So now let me see if I can get this all pulled on. Roll that back and pull these forward so they can be pushed through here, and then wriggle this. I might have to cut here, only because this isn't going to give me as much give as the original cover did, but I'll have a look, see how it goes first before I decide to do any of that. Push these down between the two foam areas here all the way through to the base. I'm not going to pull it through too hard because I want to be able to get this over the back here. I just want it to be in so I can pull it when I'm ready. Make sure all of that comes through like that. Perfect. And see if I can get this over the back here without cutting anything. Just ease it all into position as best you can. It has taken a bit of pulling and pushing and easing, but it is coming into place. Hopefully exactly where it needs to go. It's just a new cover and then put the new foam on. So I am hoping this will just all pull in where it needs to. I'm trying not to put my fingers through this because I don't want to have to remake it. I've pulled it on, but it looks twisted, so I'm going to have to pull it, I think, from underneath. Boy oh boy, that is one snug fit, but it feels like it's covered the frame, which is what he wanted. At least now I know how to do it, so if I have to take it off, I know I can get it back on. So I'm going to pull in the back of here, roll that back so I can see what I'm doing. I think maybe the centre first might need to come in harder than either side, but that seems to have taken some of that out. Okay. This side, I think. Some things are a real workout. Then this side. And I'm not pulling them in as hard as they were because it's got the thicker foam. Now all I've got to do is to measure and put the tacks in that I took out originally. So I've measured up from here to here. I'm going to put the first one in here. Thank you for joining me on this project. I think it looks quite good considering the struggle I had putting it together, mainly because the fabric is a lot firmer on this one than the original one, but I think I've managed to make it look like it was when I picked it up. My only thing is that I didn't manage to get as many of those in. It's a little bit modified to what he had, but it should give him the padding that he wants across here. Thank you for joining me on this project. It was interesting, it was a bit frustrating, but I think it has turned out quite nicely. It's comparable to how it looked when I first picked it up, and I think the gentleman's going to be thrilled with it. If you'd like to see more from me, please subscribe and hit the bell button, and a few thumbs up would be brilliant. And in the meantime, take care. See you later. Ciao.